The International Day for the Support of Torture Victims is celebrated annually every 26th of June. However, the celebration this year is dovetailing into the month of July. Torture is reprehensible and a human rights abuse prohibited by international, regional, and national human rights instruments. The prohibition of torture has the status of international customary law, and as such, every nation is expected to abide by anti-torture instruments, whether they ratify treaties on torture or not. In Nigeria, several activities have been mapped out for the celebration of the 2020 International Day of Support to Torture Victims beginning from the 22nd of June 2020. However, an important intervention necessary for the restoration of victims of the torture to normal life missing in Nigeria legislature is the right of victims to rehabilitation. All victims of torture have an explicit right of rehabilitation under the Article 14 of the United Nations Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment of Punishment. Joining us now from Arise Abuja Studio is the Deputy Director of Prisoners Rehabilitation and Welfare Action, PRAWA, Ogechi Ogu, who will be discussing the major highlights of the events of the week-long celebration, which includes the launch of a 24/7 helpline for trauma, counseling, and provision of other psychological support to torture victims and survivors in Nigeria, amongst other issues on torture victims. Welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you, Ms. Ogechi Ogu. Let's go straight to it. I mean, we had a guest yesterday, and we went through the very jarring reality in society of torture, how your rights are constantly trampled upon. And you work with a lot of prisoners. I want you to help us make sense of the prisoners' plight as regards torture.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. For the issue around torture, is a very big challenge in Nigeria. Then when it comes to prisoners, in this case, we are talking about persons in detention facilities. You know, in Nigeria, we have always looked the way of the police, the way of the correctional centers when questions of torture arise. But we have up to 19 institutions that have detention facilities across the Federation. And when it comes to the discussion around torture, it happens almost in all these facilities. Although the problem we have is access to most of the facilities and the proper documentation and keeping of data of all persons that have been tortured. So torture happens in different ways and formats, as has been, provided in Article 1 of United Nations Convention Against Torture, and in our own Anti-Torture Act of 2017, precisely Section 2.1. Now, this torture, as defined, is usually committed by officials of the government, especially the security institutions, and it can come by way of inflicting pain or suffering, severe pain or suffering, emanating through obtaining information or confession, coming by way of intimidating or coercing somebody that, a person that may have been charged for an offense, and it can equally come by way of giving punishment, for a presumed act that such a person has committed. And in some other cases, this kind of treatment may come from other persons other than the government officials or security personnel, in a case where they are being instigated or giving consent, or there's acquiescence. That is when the security operatives renege on their duty, or, to protect. So that is what happens around torture. And there are several cases of persons being tortured in detention facilities across the Federation. And as we speak, the Anti-Torture Act of 2017 enlisted up to 15 types of, actions emanating from these persons that can cause both the mental and the physical pain, and suffering that we are talking about. And they come in different formats. It can come from kicking, mock execution, using cigarette butt on somebody, feeding someone with excreta, and the rest of them. So there are several experiences coming from people, but the challenge we have mostly is that we don't reach everybody that has experienced torture. The access is not there in all cases, and people are equally not so willing to talk about being tortured because of fear of reprisal from the perpetrators.
Well, which is actually the challenge, because the Anti-Torture Act of 2017 that you quoted and the Section 2.1 that you refer to grants anyone who has been tortured the right of complaint. So you've helped us to explain that fear is part of the problem. But also, the state itself outlaws any form of torture, and this is done in open view in most cases. Why is it that no effort has been made by the state itself to criminalize torture as stated in Section 4.1 of the same Anti-Torture Act? And then finally, how about secret detention places? If you cannot have access to the formal detention centers, we also have the challenge with secret detention places. And in recent times, some have even been exposed. What happened to the owners of those secret detention places?
Okay, the Torture Act has already made provision. It has already prohibited torture, and it has already made provision for a maximum of 25 years,
yes,
of imprisonment for perpetrators of torture. Now, what we should be talking about is the challenge of implementation. That is the big issue. And this is an issue that has been resonating, because when you look at the definition of torture, it should be coming from, government officials like the security agents. And now when you look at investigation and the actual prosecution, it's equally coming from these people. So that is a big challenge on its own. Although we have several cases of, the institutions like the Nigerian police force talking about orderly room trial for perpetrators of torture within the institution. But at the same time, what everybody is looking forward to is a situation where we see actual cases in court that is in line with the provisions of the Anti-Torture Act. See where actually such officers, maybe when they have gone through the orderly room trial, they have been dismissed, a further step is taken to ensure that what the Act asks for is done, which is proper investigation, prosecution, and the punishment coming. I am yet to see a case, of, any perpetrator coming from these institutions, going to court, and coming out receiving that same punishment. So that is where we are. But we equally know that the Attorney General of the Federation has equally in that same act been given the mandate to see to it that this act is implemented. So that is the call, part of the call we are making, as we celebrate this International Day, in support of torture victims, that the Attorney General should take steps to ensure that this is done. What is the Act has prescribed should be done. Although for us in PRAWA, apart from the issue around, investigation, prosecution, and ensuring punishment following that, we are equally asking for other things. And it's a major thing that is missing from the Anti-Torture Act, because the UN Convention talks about Article 14 precisely, talks about the rehabilitation of torture victims. And this is critical because someone that has undergone torture will still be part of the society. And when that person has mental issues, has challenges emanating from the trauma that he has gone through, the person may not be able to fit into the society as he should. And that would be a loss for us. So that rehabilitation is the key component that is missing in our own Anti-Torture Act. And that is one of the things PRAWA is asking for, that provision should be made, for that. Or in the interim, as we await an amendment that will incorporate rehabilitation. Although the Act, Section 9, Sub 3, provides for other remedies like compensation, you can go to court and seek remedy in terms of special or general damages. But we are still waiting for that rehabilitation. The government is expected to make that provision, or with the present act that is on the table, provide guidelines to help utilize the present act and achieve the purpose of rehabilitation, and supporting even private organizations that provide such services. Because we have seen that this is very, very critical. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed us to the many challenges, of torture and the mental health issues, and the need to provide support to victims.
Thank you for that. And speaking of the COVID-19 pandemic, I'd like you to take us through the training that PRAWA recently gave to some FCT correctional service officers. Can you tell us what that entailed? Because you were training them on appropriate sanctions for offenders. And can you tell us about any plans you have to take that training across Nigeria?
Yes, we have reached out to 25 states. Up to 8 states have received the training already on non-custodial measures. We are working towards reaching out the entire federation. Already we have 25 states, we have reached out to, we have their contacts, and we're planning a big national training for them come next week. Now, taking us back to the celebration of the International Day, one big thing that we did that last week, specifically on the 24th, was to organize a regional webinar where we talked about prevention and support to torture victims. And there we talked about the issues arising from international level, from regional, and from the different countries that make up West Africa. And a lot was discussed there. We got lessons from different jurisdictions. And the issues were discussed, and CSOs, other civil society organizations, were part of that training and that webinar, actually. And a lot was raised, and consciousness was raised around that. And part of what we did, too, in that last week was to have a specialized training for counselors, volunteer counselors, and psychologists who will be providing services, support services to torture victims. And that led to equally the establishment of what we call the helplines. We now have helplines because the pandemic introduced us to using other medium, to address these issues. We were no longer reaching the correctional centers, to provide the necessary services.
If I may just interrupt, we need to take a short commercial break. Please stay with us. We'll be back with you in a matter of minutes. Welcome back to the morning show here on the Arise News channel. Still with us is Ogechi Ogu, Deputy Director of Prisoners Rehabilitation and Welfare Action. Ogechi, before we went on break, you were responding to the question that has been raised by Tundun here. If you may just continue.
Okay, what I was trying to say is that I wanted to really emphasize on the things that we did regarding torture victims last week. And one of those was the training for counselors and for psychologists, mostly the volunteers, in preparation for support services to victims of torture, and that we were able to get helplines for these persons. And if you may permit me, maybe I should read out these helplines so that they know they can access psychologists and receive free counseling from them.
Yes, please go ahead.
They will now have telecounseling. Okay, so the helplines are mostly glow lines, and these are 090 556 2656. Another is 090 555 62449. Again, we have 090 555 62323. Then 090 555 62674. Then the last is 090 555 63445. And we equally have an email address to which anyone can send in complaints, and that is helplines@prawa.org. Now, this is frontline numbers, and once it is called, an SMS can be sent to this line, because we equally understand the fact that some may not, have the funds to make calls. So just simply sending a text to say, I am a torture victim, we equally get back to the person immediately. Now, the email can equally be sent, and these numbers, they are the frontline numbers that receptionists will pick, and this receptionist will document the information that the person has given and take further steps to match such survivor with a counselor. So there will be a plan. It's not make a call immediately and you start receiving counseling. First of all, it is documented and then communicated to a counselor. Now, what are we hoping to achieve with this? We have found that technology can be quite helpful, because issues of silence, not being able to speak out, has been a big challenge in terms of reaching out to torture victims. But this will now provide persons opportunity to talk, using technology without anybody seeing them, knowing them, and still receiving the attention they require. And again, it gives us a broader, opportunity to reach out to as many persons as possible. So we appreciate this opportunity given, and utilizing this medium to call on Nigerians, anybody that knows any person that has suffered torture at any level, to utilize this platform to reach out and get the proper, attention that they deserve.
Right.
Now, apart from the... Okay.
Okay, you can go ahead. You can go ahead.
Okay, I said that apart from the, the tele lines, the free tele lines for communicating the counselors, we equally have continuous training for, the counselors, the psychologists, and one of such training was held last week. And we collaborated with other organizations internationally and regionally to give these trainings. And one of such organizations, is the International Rehabilitation Council on Torture. We equally have another one from Kenya, IMLU, and the International Federation for Psychotherapy Center, then Global Justice Resource Center, USA. So our target is to make sure that both the psychologists and the counselors are equipped, to deliver on this.
All right. I wanted to talk to you, and kudos on the good job you're doing. I wanted to talk to you about funding for this advocacy, because it's really very important. When you look at the prevalence of torture in this country, and the fact that a lot of people don't get justice, then you start to look at, organizations like yours, how they can get funding, maybe how they can get more counsel that can push their cases and the likes. How are you doing that? And secondly, I know this is on this platform, but how are you pushing awareness? I mean, how is everybody or anybody that might have been tortured, how are they aware of what you're doing so that they can push? And if there's somebody that has suffered any form of torture now, what can they do to reach you? How can they reach you, and how can you press their case?
Okay, apart from the lines that have been provided, we are equally partnering with other civil society organizations across the Federation. In fact, we have established a platform for that purpose, so that the information we know actually that it's not every torture victim that can access the kind of information we are giving out now. So we are equally depending on local NGOs, faith-based organizations, those that work at grassroots levels with these persons, to provide them with information on the services we render. So already a platform is being established, and we are calling on, NGOs, other civil society organizations to key in. We are willing to take in any information that is given to us. And already one of the services that PRAWA provides is legal and paralegal, support services to indigent persons. So that is another level, we can take. We can go into the enforcement of fundamental human rights of these persons. And most importantly...
Okay, quickly.
Hello, I couldn't get...
Go ahead, we can hear you.
We can hear you, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear us, yeah?
Okay, so now what... I can hear you well.
Okay,
so
please.
What I was trying to say is that we already have a platform. We collaborate with LACON, that is Legal Aid Council of Nigeria. We can equally work with MBA to provide services and other organizations that are already providing services on that. So the major thing we do is provision of legal and support services. And this we can equally give to, torture victims. We can provide our services to them. But it has to be clear that the actual, the justice that a victim demands in terms of getting the perpetrator to be accountable, and which will equally lead to the end to impunity, is that which comes from proper prosecution. And you know that prosecution cannot come from NGOs and CSOs. Rather, it is still from the Ministry of Justice. So part of what we are doing is to call for the rising of the voice, giving of voice, to torture victims. Let us collectively speak out against torture and call out, the necessary institutions that have the responsibility to prosecute, to take up this responsibility.
Well, thank you very much, Ogechi Ogu. I'm sure that our viewers have heard you clearly. We should all speak out against torture. Thank you very much for joining us.